Yeah, thank you. Our master's student. Granddaughter.
It's separate, but it's the same.
Yeah, I think so.
No, different. It's those. I couldn't even pronounce after this. Mark anyways. It goes over. The construction.
It's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call tonight's meeting to order. And we will begin with our land acknowledgement statement. The Chinookan peoples, known as the Clackamas and Cascades, are the indigenous people of the land now inhabited by the city of Wood Village and other areas of the Columbia River. The village of Nechakli was located near today's Blue Lake Park. Ancestral life of these peoples included a seasonal round of resource gathering and stewardship from the Wapato fields and fishing areas of the Columbia River to the cedar and huckleberry gathering areas of the High Cascades. Introduced disease from early settlers dramatically reduced the number of these people. They signed the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 with the United States government and were forcibly removed to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. We are honored by the collective work of many Native nations leaders and families who are demonstrating resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity, and we are honored to be guests upon these lands. Now I'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Those of you who haven't been here before, flags in the back, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty for all. Thank you for that. Now we will open the floor for citizen comment on non-agenda items. Are there any citizens that would like to make comment on non-agenda items? Pam, did we have any written? Okay, thank you. Close the floor then. And we will consider the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda that anybody wants to discuss or take off before we have a vote? All right, then I'd entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
Move to accept the consent agenda.
Any other discussion?
Just to say that I appreciate seeing snow cap there, and I'm not sure if they've been involved in that before.
Not yet,
I really appreciate that
absolutely.
that addition there. So thanks for expanding that.
Reminder.
The only other, I guess, comment is, I know years past, we've done entertainment, like a live band, talking to just community members of what they've experienced and what they would like to also see. So some more cultural inclusion. So somebody came up with an idea of maybe a DJ that can do a mix of things and all community members that reside within Wood Village University.
I'll look into that. Thank you.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That calendar is approved. Tonight, we have a wonderful opportunity. I've sort of tongue-in-cheek said before that there's very few things that the mayor can do in Wood Village that the rest of the city council can't. And one of those is proclamation. And honored, and it's a pleasure to be able to make this proclamation tonight. The 2022 City of Wood Village proclamation supporting the designation of April as Parkinson's Awareness Month. Whereas Parkinson's disease affects 1 million people in the United States, is the second most common neurodegenerative disease, and is believed to be caused by a combination of genetic and environmental factors, and is the leading cause of death according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and where it is estimated that Parkinson's costs the United States $58 billion every year, of which the federal government shoulders $29 billion, leaving American families to cover the remaining $29 billion. And whereas it is estimated that by the year 2037, the number of people with Parkinson's in the US will nearly double, and the disease will cost Americans at least $79 billion every year. And whereas the symptoms of Parkinson's disease can include dementia and cognitive impairment, tremors, slowness of movement, freezing in place, inability to walk and maintain balance, speech and swallowing disturbances, and a variety of other symptoms. And whereas the Michael J. Fox's Foundation's Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative works hand in hand with federal and state efforts to identify the cause of Parkinson's in an effort to one day prevent Parkinson's. And whereas there are tens of millions of Americans who are caregivers, family members, and friends greatly impacted by Parkinson's disease. Whereas more research and increased education and community services are needed to find better treatments and a cure as well, and maintain dignity for those living with the disease today. Now, therefore, I, Mayor T. Scott Hardin of the City of Wood Village, do hereby proclaim April as Parkinson's Awareness Month in 2022, given under my hand on this 24th day of 2022, and to which I've caused the seal of the city to be affixed and made the proclamation public. And that tonight.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'd also like to thank Kevin for being here. Kevin is with the Parkinson's Resource Center of Oregon. I think I got that right, a volunteer. And Kevin that brought it to my attention that April was Parkinson's Awareness Month. Oh, you can say it for the entire meeting if you'd like. You could speak if you'd like as well. Thank you. Forgive me for not remembering your last name, but if you could give us your last name and also your address, that would be wonderful.
Mayor and Town Council, my name is Kevin Mansfield. The address is 163 43 Northeast Russell. This happens with I do want to thank Mayor and City Council. Parkinson's. For the month of April, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2001. I was diagnosed, my neurologist told me, shit, Parkinson's, come back and see me in 6 months. And that was it. I had no idea what it was, what to look forward to. I looked it up on the computer and it told me about the advanced stages. Depressive mood, bad. I didn't know what to expect or how soon that happened. Further research found Parkinson's research. I talked to them probably about an hour or two. They told me that it was progressive disease. They asked me at that time if I would like to join us. At that time, they had a waiting list. I had to wait probably 2 months. And they called me back, said that they had support group open and asked me to go to it. And I said, sure. At downtown at Good Samaritan Hospital, doctor's office. Had 45 of us there. Happened for about 2 to 3 months. I decided that it was after that, I was asked if I would be a facilitator. Had a conference in the summer we have every year, about 8 years ago. A member from Michael J. Fox come and talk to us at that presentation. That time when they were working on changing laws with Social Security government because they accept Parkinson's degenerative disease. After fighting with them for a few years, I had to fight for 2 years. We got them to change their Fox Foundation is a ambassador. Talked to our representative. Parkinson's community. Now it benefits us if they would pass certain. A lot of times I give them examples. Have people that live in have Parkinson's. Second Tuesday of the month. Start next month in April. I'd like to come see them. Proclamation.
Thanks for being here and certainly representing the Michael J. Fox organization, and sounds like they got you in the right place. It appears
Try the
as
best I can. We just
Yeah.
I just got done talking to, last month I talked to Representative Kurt discussed price of medications. That's out of control. Or Jeff Markley.
Right.
Very important that we keep it. A lot of people. Travel, especially those that live in. Nervous and everything they are. Being seen right is the point of, he's behind me. Had Jeff Mark talk to him about support. Veterans Administration. But a very dear friend of mine died of Parkinson's. He ended up Capitol Hill and spent it talking to our representative.
Well, it also sounds like, Kevin, that your work transcends Parkinson. When you're talking to senators about pharmacy costs and drug costs. So you're speaking for a lot of us. So thanks for
Yes,
the
I-
work.
One of my doctors wanted to give me have it filled, and they said that my asked him what the price was. I'm sorry, I live on. Government with to
Oh, to just started a new job and between insurance. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Kevin, you're an ambassador for all of us.
I tried.
Keep up the good work.
Next up then is our tiny home and RV code discussion with John and master's program capstone project students from
Yes, so good evening, Mayor, City Councilors, Planning Commission. As you set up, so as I'm introducing them, so this is our PSU capstone team here to discuss additional habitable housing here in Wood Village and what the options are. It's been a pleasure working with them. Me specifically, probably about a month now, I've been working with this team. Greg started and Emmeline a little earlier. So, and I'm going to be speaking on behalf of City Manager Dirks also. He's unavailable tonight. So before we get started, so we have 30 minutes carved out. We're going to let them go through their introduction of the tiny home on wheels and RV possibilities here in Wood Village. They're going to give a little background and kind of moving forward, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions also. So with that, if you want to introduce yourself and you can just get started.
actually, while they're pulling up their presentation, I was remiss in not opening tonight's meeting as a joint meeting between the City Planning Commission, and so we are by Planning Commission member and the chair of our Design Review Board, Jim Mott, and Planning Commissioner Stanley Dirks.
So while they're getting this set up, so there's no specific action tonight. Basically, we're looking for direction for city staff and PSU capstone team.
And John, let me just ask a qualifying question before we get started. This, there's not necessarily a timeline we're on here either. Is that correct?
Well,
We have a tentative timeline to look
yeah,
at.
Okay.
they're going to go through the tentative, timeline.
But statutory,
right, but
nothing statutory.
I
Okay.
know Seth later on after this presentation is going to go through
Yeah.
some House Bill 2001
Thank you.
that is
Yeah.
time sensitive. We're trying to match this with the PSU capstone folks' time schedule and with HB 2001.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
there's also a proposed date in the staff report for the.
Oh,
Yes.
Yes, I did.
And-
I did see
And
that.
they'll have that timeline
Yes.
for you.
Go ahead. Great. Thank you, Mayor, councilors, and planning commissioners. It is an honor to present before you all today. The additional housing choices code update we are presenting for your feedback and consideration is intended to expand the housing options available to Wood Village residents. It is focused on the most affordable, non-subsidized housing options for those that are most in need, permitting recreational vehicles and tiny homes on wheels on residential lots. It will provide options to keep families together, to make ends meet, and deter houselessness. So here's a rundown of today's presentation agenda: who we are and what we bring to the table, what current housing conditions look like, what the current proposed code changes are, a key considerations matrix, which you have as your Appendix B, and Sam will walk you through for discussion, a timeline for adoption and recommendations, and the corollary municipal code updates that would come with any changes. I'll pause between 2 and 3 for questions, and then number 4 is all discussion-based as well. We are Small Wins Planning, graduate students in our final workshop project for the Masters of Urban and Regional Planning at Portland State University. In response to the council's work plan priorities, our project will draft code, incorporate council, commission, public, and expert feedback to improve this code for later adoption. We will coordinate a public open house, create public educational materials, and provide model code that other surrounding municipalities can also adopt. We bring some pretty cool background experience to this project. Myself and Sam are concurrently earning our certificates in real estate development and in affordable housing. Grace, online, has extensive experience in ADU development. Matthew, also online, is our policy and research specialist. And Andrew has worked in housing needs analyses across the United States. We are called Small Wins Planning because we believe that regular incremental changes are the most effective ways to produce long-term housing opportunities in our communities. Everyone here knows we are in a housing crisis. This is just one of many measurements to illustrate this point. Wood Village has extremely low vacancy rates, significantly lower than Multnomah County overall, and rents consistently higher than Multnomah County. Few housing options plus high rents in an already lower income area equals housing crisis. And along came House Bill 2001, or HB 2001, to address some of this, which sounds like you'll be discussing very soon. But HB 2001 does not categorically address the most affordable options often necessary to avoid houselessness. And here in Wood Village, given the lot sizes and other constraints, a lot of these HB 2001 housing options can't and won't be built. This is where the additional housing choices code update can help fill in that most affordable of housing options, providing for folks with RVs and tiny homes on wheels, typically costing well below $100,000 to develop. This is an important choice that we recognize as far preferable to houselessness on this missing housing continuum. Here in Wood Village, many people live in some form of mobile home or smaller unit type already, and the city's rental options are limited. We know we have friends and family here that are unhoused and are lucky when they have an RV they can occupy as a habitable space. This can be housing for children coming home from college, adult caretakers, grandfamilies,
and more. Let's explore how legalizing RVs, tiny homes on wheels on private lots can provide a very affordable living option and provide potential rental income for property owners who might not otherwise be able to construct a full-on ADU or expand through remodeling. So here we come to the additional housing choices code update. Imagine a beautiful, charming, habitable space, but on wheels, like these ones, to house residents at an affordable price. What's more, we know this is already happening informally. People are hurting and need this as a legal option. We want to codify how the city of Wood Village will permit these habitable spaces, an important term, habitable space, that is not constrained by the same requirements of building code standards for traditional dwelling units, which will allow for the deeper affordability needed. Let's look at what the proposed changes are and what they are not to ensure we're all on the same page about what this will do. Now, I'm going to pause here now before moving on to check for any questions or confusions up to this point.
Basically, the tiny home would have to keep its wheels under, same as the motor home, and that's essentially how they avoid some of the current zoning restrictions.
Exactly right. Cool. So to that point, RVs and tiny homes are pretty well understood terms. The one that isn't quite as ubiquitous of a term yet is tiny home on wheels. For all intents and purposes, as it relates to the city code, tiny homes on wheels and RVs are pretty much the same thing. RVs sometimes have a motor. Tiny homes on wheels never have a motor. The distinguishing feature between this and a traditional ADU are clearly the wheels and chassis and the lack of a required foundation, though the city of Wood Village will still require some form of a parking pad, which is less expensive and less intrusive than the full-on foundation required for an ADU. Because it's not on this regulated foundation and is not subject to building code, it is not considered an official dwelling unit and will instead be recognized as a habitable space. These things together all mean a significantly lower cost per square foot than an ADU or single family house, and thus more affordable. Currently, this additional housing choices code update before you is written to only allow one RV or tiny house on wheels, not a cluster or group on an empty lot. It cannot be in the right of way, and if it's in a side driveway of the principal structure, it must be behind the front building plane. The fears of RV sewage dumping or improperly maintained vehicles like Cousin Eddie's RV here being left on the lawn won't be permitted. The city already has a nuisance code in place, section 816-200, that ensures a sightly, healthy, and environmental upkeep of all property on any residential lot. So we should instead be imagining the potential of something like this.
And just ask a question here, back to the one of your pictures there. The RV, if it's parked in, it cannot be parked in front of the house, correct?
Correct.
Does that mean it's in the back or on the side?
At minimum, the side, and it can be behind it as well.
All right, thank you.
Unit like this could be the same.
On the side, on the back, as long as it is not in front of the primary building plane.
And it meets setbacks, approved pad, so.
Now, there's a range of ways that a few other cities have started to write this into their code. We've combed through lots of pages of riveting code language and presented you with this version from which to incorporate your feedback. Furthermore, the Oregon legislative arena around this is changing right now to make these exact additional housing choices more feasible and accessible and permissible. With that, I'm going to pass it on to our code expert, Sam Huck, to walk you through the highlights and decision matrix for the proposed code.
Thank you, Mayor Hardin and council members, planning commission members. As Scott mentioned, my name is Sam Huck, and I'm going to be now facilitating the discussion portion of this presentation. A little bit of background first, though. The proposed new code, which is in your packet as Exhibit A, would be a new section of the Wood Village Zoning and Development Code titled Section 396, Tiny Homes on Wheels and Recreational Vehicles. Our team here at Small Winds Planning has written this new code to allow for tiny homes on wheels as well as recreational vehicles, as Scott mentioned, habitable spaces. Term that is included as a new proposed definition attached to your staff report as Exhibit C. Just wanted to highlight the first line in the purpose section of the new code, which would this will provide property owners with additional housing choices and a means of obtaining emergency shelter, companionship, or rental income from tenants or family members in either the tiny home on wheel, RV, or the principal. Main highlights of the new code are, as currently drafted, is to allow these additional housing choices without disrupting the underlying base and zone standards and the other existing code as it's currently written and adopted. As you've probably seen in Exhibit A, there's additional purpose sections that have additional purpose statements on why this is a priority for the city. And we've workshopped these with Greg, Emily, and John in our meetings. Also in the proposed code is a requirement for all the utilities for a tiny home on wheel or an RV to be provided and installed underground by the property owner and then terminate at a single location. This includes electrical hookups, potable water connection to wastewater. Setbacks will remain the same as the underlying zone has them written. And we've also written in an additional 5-foot separation from any structure on the property to allow for that fire separation. The upkeep of a permitted tiny home on wheels or an RV is also covered, as Scott mentioned, in section 8.16.200, which is the specific nuisances prohibited. And the placement of a tiny home on wheels or an RV on a property will only be allowed to be behind the front building plane of the principal unit, not in the right of way, and it won't interfere with existing parking requirements. And will also be required to be placed on that pad that meets public works standards. The maximum height of a permitted tiny home on wheels or an RV will not exceed the height of a principal unit. And we did also add in some short-term rental language, which basically mirrors the short-term ADU section of the Wood Village Code. At any of the spaces considered for short-term rental, one of them would have to be occupied by the property owner. So as I mentioned, we've mentioned habitable spaces a number of times, which is one of 2 new definitions added to the Wood Village Zoning and Development Code. Exhibit C that there is both those definitions, habitable space and tiny home on wheels.
Just a clarification here on the short-term rental and that language that habitable space as part of the total shall be used as short-term shall be used as short-term vacation rental unless the RV or the principal unit is owner occupied. Does that mean the owner would occupy one of the habitable spaces on property that would be also the owner occupied house?
So it's written
Or
to allow
property.
for that flexibility where the owner could live in the tiny home on wheels or the RV or the principal unit and use whichever other one as the short term. And so it allows for both scenarios essentially where the owner could live in the principal unit, rent out the tiny home on wheels,
Okay,
vice versa.
okay, thanks.
That's code that we had out within the past couple of years and
Okay.
a lot of sort of ghost properties that only.
Yeah, of
Thanks for the clarification.
course. So with that background information on the code as it's currently written, we are going to look to all of you now to hear from you about the items in Exhibit B. Ask you all specifically for guidance on these questions. Feel free to stop me and ask me to go back. Some of these slides have a little bit of text on them, but it just mimics exactly what is in Exhibit B. And so, starting with that, we want to know, should two or tiny homes on wheels or RVs be allowed on a single property? Currently written, the proposed code, either or, tiny home on wheels. We have seen in other codes that, so we just, thoughts on that?
Really not sure if I want one, let alone two.
And, I'd just like to qualify anything I say here tonight could change based on public input.
Sure.
And I'm more concerned, about this discussion. I'm concerned about this discussion, but I'm more concerned about the process we're going to go through to get public input on this. So I don't like the idea too. My overall thought in this, as I read it and studied it, is that, and this council is supportive of, as a group, I'm speaking for myself here, but in our previous conversations, we have been supportive of a livable housing, affordable housing, and trying to do our part to respond to the need. This one, I think is going to require again, a lot of thinking through it and considerations. I'm inclined to look at this as a go slow effort. Supportive of it, but for things like, you showed some pictures of cities. I'd like to see this, again, that information can come forward, but who's doing it, how's it going, and how long have they been doing it, and what are the troubles they've run into? I think we should take every opportunity to learn from what somebody else has done and use that to help guide whatever our decisions are. So there's just my overall comments on that. So I'm saying one, and maybe none, but hearing more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think I would second that as well. I think that, my first input would be like one, let alone two. But that doesn't mean that I would change public. I probably think the worst, that nice little beautiful. Six months, pipes all of a sudden going into. Going to police that.
Yeah.
The policing of maintaining how these are being maintained, probably a huge.
Yeah, and just, we do have it written as just one right now. And so that's why we wanted to bring this up. Purely just an option if we want to get a pulse on.
Dan's yard already takes care of all water, so we really don't want. So we really don't want a lot of sewer in his yard. One of the suppositions that I've had about how the connections facilities would be made has not really ever been confirmed or what I envisioned was like an RV park hookup, have, a plumb to where you would have an electric pole that you plug in to a potable water source, and essentially the homeowner would be paying to create that pad. And so if that's the case, then I think that's kind of going to be de facto one, because somebody might not want to have to go through the trouble of 2 SDC charges. What I wonder, and this is, I'm considering that what you're proposing, tiny homes have to stay on the wheels, but 2001 discussion could very well end up with a home that fronts the street. Maybe not in Wood Village, but code have like 8 tiny homes off their wheels behind it, 4 on each side, that focus on a plaza, or, you know, something that's, you know, plaza that's part of the land.
Yeah, so I want to get it on record here and talk about the connections. So there'll be 2 types of connections. Either it comes off the home, just like an RV park. So those will go through permitting and inspections. So yes, they will
They tie into the principal
tie
residence
into
though.
the principal residence.
right.
If they choose to not tie into the principal residence for water and sewer, then SDCs will apply.
We've actually enabled ADUs in our code for more than a decade. And had changes there because it felt like for a minute there, they absolutely had to be separate,
Which now they do
and
not,
they don't.
and it does not increase the,
Setbacks could be met, we could conceivably with it. But we could conceivably end up with a home that had both an ADU, tiny home on wheels. That might be the way that it'll.
so the look, Jim, I think you had the question of what's that gonna look like? Look real similar to an RV park, what the sanitary sewer, you have your potable water. And I thought you had a slide, and then your power. So the power taps right into the house, and that goes again through permitting and
Like, my concern is, you know, who would be taking advantage of this, right? Would it be actual folks that have that need, or would it be folks saying, well, I have extra piece of land, might as well make some cash out of it and go. So for me, maybe a question, and, you know, because I'm not sure of all of our code, but are ADUs allowed in mobile home parks?
no, because I don't think they can meet the setbacks.
The setbacks. So this would probably also be excluded from mobile home parks, the tiny homes on wheels.
I would
Pretty
imagine
good
so, yeah.
assumption, right? And so again, my kind of the knowledge I have of the Wood Village, you know, the folks that would probably could benefit the most from this live in those situated parks. So I guess that's where I'm kind of not a struggle, but that's kind of my concern. So I'm kind of in line with what you're saying, Counselor Minor, of, you know, maybe waiting till the public input, but just looking at our demographics, those folks that are in the most need probably couldn't benefit from it, at least resident wise, right?
I mean, they probably are in the most need economically, but I mean, they already live in an area where they'd be excluded simply because of the setbacks, not because of their economic status necessarily. And so, I mean, if we see them in the mobile home parks, and I don't think this out, then we got to start talking about how we change zoning related to setbacks. And
That kind of be up to the owners of the.
And yeah, I think that once we get into HB 2001 discussion, HB 2001 discussion, you know, part of that discussion is to allow people to take advantage economically because they can, not just build it because mother-in-law because you know, it's effectively an end to single-family zoning. And there are areas where it's going to make sense for developers to come in and develop property. And I think that what we're doing with work and also 2001 work that we're looking at is trying to give our residents the knowledge to be that developer for our land value.
And I think that's the right way we need to look at it. Making sure that it does serve our residents, not a source of multiple incomes for an investor in some fashion. So I agree with that, Mayor, 100%. And again, those are tricky things. Investors have a way of making money on things you didn't think they were. I'm not a huge investor, so I'm not insulting myself because I always lose money.
Well, and we also tend to look at things as if they're going to happen simply because we've enabled them. House Bill 2001, where we're preempting development, this doesn't really mean that there's going to be tiny homes or motorhomes. Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of the Airstream trailer here, and I spent 2 years as the buyer for a company that renovates and rebuilds them. And most of those owners are looking to get it off the road. We were off the grid. We were putting 900-watt solar arrays on top of them and thousands of dollars in lithium batteries. And even Airstream will tell you that while you have purchased, what might be the creme de la creme of trailers, your finishes are still laminates and linoleum, and they are meant to be vacation vehicles. Live in them for a significant length of time, they're going to deteriorate like those finishes surfaces would if you had them in your permanent home. So it's not necessarily the choice of a lot of people.
Well, yeah, there's not a lot of people who are going to buy a $100,000 Airstream. But so I think your point's well taken. Even the most expensive RVs are not built to be, they don't last. I don't care if you bought a Prevost and parked it someplace. There's going to be deterioration. So
Thank you for those comments. And again, we will be taking these very similar questions into the public house. And so combining both your feedback and the public's feedback help us change anything in our draft code that we need to. And
Does Counselor Nissen, before we move on, Counselor Nissen want to input? Okay, guess we can move on.
Just like Walton Valley firefighter. Firehouse.
So this kind of does tie into that affordability option. If it is, as I mentioned, written to require the electrical, sewer, water hookups, but there is a scenario that would lessen the cost if the city of Wood Village did not want to require that, maybe in certain circumstances.
I'd
Thoughts
start
on
with
that?
requiring it.
Yeah.
And then we would consider, at some point, based on the situation, if we wanted to open it up to options, but I think we got to start with the requirement.
I'm sure you'll probably talk about it in the staff report and in the public outreach, and we'll talk about it again. But I also think that if it's, adjacent in front of, then we need to start talking about, effect. Visual impact on the street.
Yeah, and again, we probably rarely see this. Kind of keep it as written, and then again. On to number 3 then. This is kind of connected to that screening element, which we'll get to as number 4. Number 3 and number 4 be connected. Number 3 is just asking, should there be any design requirements? Number 4 is, do you need to have an application for the replacement? I guess I'll just say we don't think there would need to be an application for replacement if there is no design requirement. Because then the investment in the structure upgrades would have already been there and paperwork essentially. We can start at design requirements and then depending, kind of move on to number 4.
We have that anywhere now, John, where we would charge the SDC because it's a legitimate new development, but then, you know, I mean, property and somebody else took it over. I mean, they don't pay the SDC again. The
No, they
property's
don't pay
already
it
hooked
again.
up. And so, you know, would you have to have permission for one of these to leave? And would you have to, and if one left, would you have to have new permissions, one to hook up? I mean, not, you know, not a new hookup, but, you know, what,
I would say no, because you're not increasing that capacity.
Presumably because they're on wheels, they could take its place. I guess our sort of leanings on design requirements is that it would be hard to make it clear, objective, and not arbitrary between different units. But write that in if it's desired, and again, we'll take this to the house as well.
And that's again, an example of where cities have been doing it. How's it worked? And if it's worked, what's their language?
and then sort of effectively screen if it's on the side of the house where, you know, part of the fence could be 6 feet tall because it's the part of the home, but maybe the fence in the front of it could only be 3 feet tall. 3 or 4 feet for a front yard fence,
3.5 feet.
3.5. So the fence in front of it can only be 3.5.
And I will also point out that, so RVs, if they're not used as habitable spaces right there, they do not require screening. That's happen becomes a,
Well, we'll work on it.
It's just sitting there, you don't have any lights on or the TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as screening.
So then if there is, it kind of, the next question is then applied to everyone, or is it tied directly to the permitted tiny home on wheel that is brought in at that time? Or RV, like, is it connected just to that one? And if it moves, you have to go through an process, basically.
Definitely something to be involved in the public outreach because I think if I lived next door to somebody who always had their motorhome parked right beside their yard, and even if it was a nice motorhome and that traveled with it and everything, doesn't mean that I'd want to look at it all the time. I mean, a lot of RV storage places exist because associations and things like that have, you know, standards that say you can't park it here, no matter how nice it is or how new it is or how frequently you use it. It may just be that whether or not you can, you know, go back after the fact and mandate screening for, you know, motorhomes that have been parked beside a home for a couple of years now, or grandfathered in. But you know, certainly I would think that if, for one, because it's a semi-permanent sort of habitable space, living space.
And I think that's legitimate. I think that could very likely be the part of the process as we go back and look at existing. I think I think at this point needs an application. Because you don't know, one leaves and one comes in, doesn't mean it's going to be the same as the one that left. So I just think, again, I want to start small. I want to start with the city having options at this. And so I don't mean to be the curmudgeon here about this, But I think we have to start small, so.
I think a permit just kind of allows for some tracking and some knowledge of what's going on. I mean, we're a small town. But that doesn't mean that we have a staffer that's walking the city streets every day to look and see what might have changed and decide whether or not we need to do something about it potentially. And permitting would just,
Yeah.
allow us to know.
John, applying for it each time would be one of the forms to track this. which has
Exactly.
been one of the extremely difficult things in all of the other cities we were at is keeping track of it. It's
Yeah.
been difficult to do.
Yeah.
And so that would be one of the methods for doing. They are, where they aren't, what the turnover.
Yeah.
is.
I think it's absolutely necessary.
Something.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just a question, because it's come up in discussion. Is the code currently, the way it's written, enable for someone to put one of these spaces in and then rent it out to someone?
Yes, that would mirror the short-term rental language. Well, if they wanted to use it as a short rental, and then if they wanted to use it as a rental, they would have the option of doing that as well.
So then we would also probably want to have as public discussion whether or not that would fall underneath our transient lodging tax provisions or rental housing. And with the rental housing, whether or not we could require inspections if that's the route they decided to go.
Sure.
And I'm not sure I can articulate why it is that I agree with that, but certainly it was something that we would need to track from the standpoint that right now, as we've already talked about, our short-term rental code requires that one of the habitable spaces on the property by the owner of the property. I think that if it did, reach a point to like Councilor Rios Campos made earlier, where it's a development that somebody sells the home, sells the pad, if different people buy it, and then it couldn't be a short-term rental anymore. Have to be able to set the code for that because two separate owners. And maybe we have to decide if somebody can buy both the home and the pad, or I don't know how we get there, but clearly we need to be able to track when it was a short-term rental. And then could somebody conceivably buy the home and somebody else buy the pad, and then it never be a short-term rental.
As an investor, that's what I would look.
Yeah, in the case where this is on one parcel though, you couldn't sell those separately without actually doing a partition of the existing lots, which would have to come to planning commission.
Planning commission.
And then kind of in, we're talking about tracking and things like that. So if someone was to put one of these on their property and they didn't want to have the utilities, come from there, but come from the city, they would still have to, that way. So that could be a form of tracking. And so could we also say, if that was the case, or could we put that has to be a requirement so that if someone were to detach, kind of like, when you rent a house or fall into get service in their name, could that be a possibility as well?
You're saying if they wanted to rent the space, they couldn't daisy chain off the existing home, sewer and water. They would have to put a separate water and sewer hookup in and pay SDCs on their water meter. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
Okay.
a form of tracking and also kind of, I guess, more or less tracking and just able to control kind of those things.
I think too, we need to look at affordability.
Yeah.
I think that's,
I think you're hearing, we want to track
Yeah,
in some fashion.
And, there's even an argument to be made on affordability because, paying, $4,000, parks, water and sewer, still adds a significant cost to the home, but it's not like you're adding it to already $250,000. adding it to the value of a tiny home on wheels or classified as affordable option, even if they're having to.
And I think the reality is that when we, what we looked at for the density analysis for House Bill 2001, if we are going to have requirements for rentals to do rental, rental permit, rental inspection, if we are going to require things like additional STCs, at that point, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put in an RV pad. You might as well put in a detached duplex or ADU, because at that point, renting a pad for $300 or $400 a month or whatever it ends up being is probably not going to make sense. And so what you'll probably see people do is investors go permanent structure route. And this would probably be more maybe temporary permanent for personal use or for close family rather than using it as income.
And so if someone did decide to then run this like village through the like existing unit, there's still permitting that has to go along through that, or is that?
Sorry, I didn't catch the.
So instead of like running their own, like, getting the sewer and the water from the city, and they were gonna do it from the existing house.
Right.
What would be that process? They would still have to get permits.
They get permits.
Yeah, so that
And then
could also
everything-
be a form of
It's
tracking.
inspected.
Yeah.
yes.
Is there capacity for them? I mean, I can understand potable water from a hose and the electricity. What I don't get is how attached habitable space could plumb into the main of the home. I mean, would the
It would be
homeowner
just
have
like
to
an
pay for them
RV.
to tap into their lateral, or is it still going to be an RV hookup?
It would be an RV hookup and then it goes 4-inch line to our main.
So either way, you slice it, whether they're gonna sort of, I mean, they're detached, they could still get the water, they could still get the electric from the home, but they're gonna have to pay a sewer SDC, and they're gonna have to build the way for that 4-inch line to tap into the main.
So there is an SDC if they go straight from where the connection is to the main. They go to the house, there's no SD.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm asking, is
yeah.
how on sewer do you go to the house? Do they, I mean, we know that their lateral is their own property because, we've had leaks, and that's how we've learned that folks are responsible for it. So are they gonna plumb into their lateral?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
all right.
misunderstood you.
And most single-family houses have excess capacity, both for water and sewer. I think back in the 80s and 90s, they used to install single-family residential with 5/8 piping from the water mains. At some point that shifted to 3/4 inch, what became the new standard, so we don't install anymore. And that provides generally more than enough flow. Add an additional ADU or
Which is good
residence.
because HB 2001 never took water and sewer capacity or anything like that into account. They just, regardless of what the underground infrastructure looked like.
So regardless, there would be some investment that would need to be made on behalf of the property owner with the pad, and then lateral or out to the main with SDCs just to cap. And then sounds like tracking is definitely something. So as it's written, it would only be allowed in the LR 7.5 and LR 12. We want to know if you want to see it elsewhere. Logistically unlikely to be possible in a lot of the MR zones in the city. And the way that it's written to have just one property owner, if manufactured house properties is owned by one person, then as it's written, they could only have one tiny home on wheels. Or so it gets a little, I guess, confusing. One big and is just one property, but we did want to pose the question as, should it just stay in the LR zones?
Well, I mean, besides the spacing, you know, what are the logistics of MR2, for instance? Well, it's different. Well, it's not really different. So in MR2, like the Tree Hill Park condominiums, which is properties, that's where I live. I do own a proportional amount of land value. It's not big as my parking space probably, but I own a proportional amount. That's not necessarily true in the and so, you know, would it be the owner of the land? Took the gloves off and said, let's do that here, that would have to be paying the SDCs, coming to lobby us to change the setbacks. I mean, it wouldn't be actual people that own the mobile homes, but that's their personal property, but they don't own them.
Right.
So unless we, you know, help them form a co-op or to buy the land, there's justifies me how legislatively
We agree, but we just know that there are other zones in the city, and so as an option. And property ownership changes, and if it gets, you know, subdivided or something like that.
but we know from personal experience with the owner of the Wood Village Green. He's not a good owner. You know. Involved in making sure that it's safe or that the private get upkeep. I mean, if there are victims. So there are actually available spaces in there that we've said that he can't rent because, you know, he doesn't do the upkeep for the fire life safety, for instance. So what sinister things could he do if we said yes in a sort of intervening time? Folks bought their mobile home park as a co-op. How could he make their life worse by potentially piling more properties in there? Took the gloves off and he built a few fire hydrants. Because you know, if he's already getting $600 a month for one mobile home on the space, then could he go and charge $1,200 a month? Mobile home and a tiny home on wheels on the space. We could accidentally make it worth his while to build a few fire hydrants if we doubled the capacity of his mobile home park.
It was staff's recommendation to keep it.
Yeah.
But we want to, again, keep it
Right.
open to planning commission, council, and then also
And I would say
during public
to,
comment.
yeah, exactly. The questions that are coming up that we're not able to answer are important to have recorded too. And because those will help inform us later too. So
Because when we can safely get to yes, we want to. For instance, we just changed code to allow folks that live in mobile homes to be able to add on to their mobile home. We want them to be able to, but we'd also the number of by a bad owner.
Investors out for one thing.
There,
Make money. Yeah.
one question,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, one question is, the single family lots that are in the town center for Riverwood. So the way it's written currently, they would not be allowed to have tiny homes or RVs on their lots.
And when we changed Riverwood South's zoning, not even require the 8-foot setback between homes, we shrunk it to 5 so that they could get some more homes into that area. And so it's hard for me to imagine that they could possibly cram one into 5 feet.
Lots where that would be
Maybe. feasible.
Maybe feasible. Yeah.
And as I understand, that was a PUD and likely as an HOA as well.
They do have a HOA.
I'm in an MR2. And I could get a number of these on my lot. But I want to see going slow. LR 5 and LR 12 and leave it alone until we get our feet on the ground on this thing.
I think I'm for that too, for sort of all the reasons that I've.
I'm in agreement as well.
Then just looking to our proposed timeline, here we are at the first March 24th joint workshop. Next is we do have the public open house scheduled for April 25th. And we will basically present these options in that forum. And then take all that feedback from both you and House to draft a new version of the code, or with incorporating the suggestions that have been made. Then on that March 31st date, we can have another joint workshop like this, or if it's ready, we can ask Planning Commission for a recommendation. This timeline is flexible. We have June 14th as a presentation to City Council, because as John mentioned, that sort of lines up with our school ending. But it doesn't have to be that way. Rush the city,
It lines up with what?
our graduation.
Oh, your
So our-
graduation.
Our project will be wrapping up, but
That's right. It'll be much harder to get them for free
Yeah.
after June the 14th.
You know,
Much harder.
we'll write them a letter though and say you're working hard on it. Let them get their diploma.
I will say all of us are interested in seeing this through to adoption,
Yeah.
if that's possible. So that is something we're excited about.
I
know.
did have a,
I think, excuse me, Counselor, I think one of the questions was presenting to the Planning Commission, and then when it gets time for adoption, do you want to do a joint meeting or do you want to do separate meetings?
before we get to that, I have a question about the process here. And I'm just putting this on the table here for our discussion. This seems like a topic that there's going to be a lot of opinions. And people are going to have to think it through. They're going to have to hear it. The public, the open house is critical. But my question is, shouldn't this be a public hearing following that before we made any decision?
This is the same, this hearing tonight is the same as an open house. I mean, we might not have, gone out and done door hangers or, bought food or paid for interpreters or childcare. But if you want to weigh in on this, you could be here tonight, and you could be here again on May 31st to talk to the Planning Commission, because that's an open public meeting, just like a open house. And, you're
Yeah.
going to be late to the party, but you could even come on June the 14th and say, no, I object. These are the changes that I want to make. And there's nothing that says that we can't, at that point in time, that we can't change the timeline based on their
Well,
response and say, we need more
yeah.
meetings, or we need more thought, or.
I think the reason and I'm not even necessarily suggesting it, is that a public hearing is then on record for the decisions that we make. Now, the open house people, hopefully we can get people to the open house, but that's the only reason. Not to delay the process, but to make sure that we really do give all the opportunities for input. So
But I think
That's-
that,
that's
and that also falls in line with our goal number 8, intentional community outreach. So I would be in favor to, kind of hear if you guys are the ones planning for the outreach, what does that look like, and that we incorporate. I would suggest a separate date for different languages, because understanding just the barrier about languages. So if we're having translation, I would assume it wouldn't be live translation where, there's a presenter, there's a pause for translation, is that simultaneous? So there could be, information lost in translation, so for me, I would appreciate, the intentionality of saying we're gonna have, a public hearing for, say, English speakers, a public hearing for Spanish speakers and other languages. I know it's gonna put more work on staff, but then we are being intentional and meeting goal number 8 that the city put out there. So even with information that's being put out there, have it be translated, just so we are being inclusive. Residents,
Some of our capabilities might, it's unfortunate, but some of, we would need to know how many people were going to be there. Because we do have a contractor that we pay for translation services with, WAVA. And they can bring headphones and they can do concurrent translation. But would we need, 6 pairs or 60 pairs? That's part of the issue. And we do have a history of doing the separate language meetings even before we added goal 8 to our city goals. That's where we learned basically that paying for childcare and paying for food and interpreters can bring people out. We did that with our town center master plan. It's also a small part of why redoing the town center master plan took 2 years. But there's precedent, for having, we did Ukrainian, Spanish, Vietnamese, Russian, and one other language, I believe, when we town center master plan.
but I think there's value in doing it. And the reason I say there's value, if we just go back to the Main Street Town Halsey branding meeting we had, the majority of the folks attending, 99% were Spanish speaker. And I think that opportunity was unique because the outreach was done by certain community members. So if it gave them a safe space, right? And so I think there is value in doing.
So this is a question for staff and for small wins. Could you keep us in the time frame that you would like it to be in, if for no other reason than a line graduation, by saying that we have public open house on April 25th, 26th, and 27th? And then we do set them up for 3 different languages.
I think there were some
Is that gonna exhaust
scheduling
staff
conflicts.
capacity, or is it gonna?
Well, I think there were scheduling conflicts. I think the 25th is a Monday. Is that correct?
It's a Monday.
Monday.
It's a Monday, because then I think we have like a council meeting on Tuesday. We have something scheduled on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So
Well, unless
we'll
it's-
have to look at that, Mayor.
Yeah, unless there's something scheduled on, obviously, we're not gonna move a city council meeting for it. But if the Wednesday was an aforementioned Main Streets on Halsey meeting that would really only require the attention of 2 of us anyway, we would come here where we were gonna be
Right.
potentially getting
I
actual
think
work.
it was at HB 2001.
The HB 2001 hearing is scheduled for April 27th, which is the
Okay.
Wednesday, and you have a council meeting on Tuesday. So what we can do is take a look at that week and see if there's a way to flex some of the meetings or to cover and split that up a little differently
Yep.
in a way that would be more.
Well,
inclusive.
and even our planning commission, meets as needed now, and we send out a doodle poll. And so, it doesn't have to be set in stone for May 31st, because that's the day of the month that our planning commission normally meet. Have a regular planning commission.
And regarding public outreach, that the current format that we're planning on doing it is a little more of a few different stands that are up. And so it's not necessarily like a formal presentation. It'll be more short presentations for whoever wants up. We have a few different Spanish speaking folks, Small Wins Planning. So if that helps with that process, the way that it's done, that's something to consider. And then also a question, if we want to then be disseminating material, that's something we would love feedback on as well, if we should start putting it together or considering it at the least.
Well, and so, I like getting it done before your graduation, because, that is, slightly tongue in cheek when I said it'd be harder to get you for free after that date. And we want to, out in the world getting paid. So, I would like to find a way to, increase the outreach, but still squeeze it in that time.
Well, and I think that we can probably, if we get to the public meeting and we don't feel like we've got enough information for whatever the reason, if the attendance didn't show up because there are other conflicts we're not aware of, then we're gonna have to adjust it because I think our primary goal here has got to be, we got good public input.
Sure.
And then we can adjust this calendar as necessary if we need to. So that's,
Well, I mean, but
but I'm not suggesting we drag it out till next December. but-
no, but I like to beat the public on the head every once in a while, and I'm gonna take the opportunity to do it now. You have to show up. Because we want their input. We want their input. We value their input, but we don't have to have their input to pass this code. It's a hell of a lot harder to change it after it's passed than it is before. So, they got to show.
I know our meeting next week, so we meet weekly with I know our meeting next week, when Greg will be back, we'll all sit down, and I think that's the main focus is going to be that public outreach. What does that look like from this point moving forward to 5th and incorporate additional meetings?
Well, I think that's the proof's in the pudding. If we can get the public outreach that we feel comfortable with and making a decision, then we'd be ready to make a decision.
And I'll volunteer myself to help with the public outreach. I feel strongly about, yes, getting the community's input. But again, for me, outreach is intentional. So, we need to make that intentional. So just saying it is one thing, but actually doing it is another thing. So I would like to volunteer myself to help out with that.
Yeah, we'd love to help.
Correction.
And before you go, I love your name, so the development is change, and my favorite change model is Cotter's 8 steps. Celebrate small wins being one of the steps. And so, it was cool to hear, to see what your name was and then named yourself that. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you. Went through many different.
Well, it sounds like you're doing good work and
Thank you.
helping municipalities start to wrestle with this.
And great presentation too. I mean,
Thank you.
if anybody ever counsels you that if you blow it, you won't get a second chance, you took that counsel to heart. So, thank you.
We had a couple more slides. I'll just run right through them very quickly. This is where we were just gonna sort of make sure that we heard your feedback, but I think we all know that going to the public, hearing their feedback as well is extremely critical to the next draft of this code. So we did take notes as well, so we know your thoughts on these questions. Run through them again. And very quickly, this is what we just talked about is in the development code. There would be some considerations and some code cleanup in both the development code and the municipal code if this were to get adopted. And so we can tackle this at the next meeting. I know you all have to get to HB 2001 stuff.
Yeah,
Man, I'll
Portland
play
State
here.
students clearly aren't all on the same team though, because our fellow just scrubbed our municipal code and we adopted the rewrite of it, and now you're gonna make him change it.
Well,
That's if we get
we'll have to
there.
talk to this. Thank you again all very
Thanks.
much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, guys.
Thank you, and we'll see you.
Thanks for the work.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
Probably already asked some of the questions, but we'll go to Seth for our discussion on HB 2.
Mr. Mayor, Council, this is typically something that happens at our staff meetings. It takes nearly an hour and a half. 75% of it because she keeps getting interrupted, and by the time it gets to John and I, we picked off most of the things on our list on M's time. So I feel like that's the same for House Bill 2001. So what we have before you tonight is a short presentation that's recapping you guys have heard before, and then talking about next steps moving forward with House Bill 2001 update. So this was passed in 2009 legislative session. Essentially, it means that family resident passed and mandated by the state don't necessarily have a, we're nice and put enabled in the official presentation. It might be accurate to say it's mandated. If we do not adopt our own code, then as of June 30th, 2022, default code that is adopted for us is the state. So we've been working with MIG to make some tweaks to our code to fit it into ours, and then that some ability to have some design consideration. Capstone team used this exact same graphic. It talks about what intent of this was, is to try and address the housing needs between single family and large multifamily. And so what we're talking about here that this would enable is different types of housing on an existing single family lot. I'll probably come back to this as we get into the text of this. As we mentioned as part of the discussion, there was a density analysis that MIG act of what House Bill 2001 would have. And this does not mandate development. We've had the ADUs last 10 years. We've had maybe 2 or 3 of them. When looking at the density requirements for our specific lots for 7,500 square feet, MIG said that there is some potential, but the reality is you're probably going to get, it's going to be slow, and it's not going to be on any low hanging. It's going to increase development as a result of it. Because a lot of the return on investment, tearing down houses wholesale and higher density isn't there yet in Wood Village. There's a lot of lots that are closer in, have higher property values that would make that are much closer. Right there yet to have that, because I know council planning commission had worried that might spur some of that. That was the so some considerations with restrictions is that we cannot require design review hearing and set forward design elements that would have to be evaluated at the staff level. So what we have proposed in the code is at a minimum of 20% of the street facing walls must be either windows or minimum roof pitch, flat or shed roofs. And then 4 of the remaining items then would be dormers, balconies, bay windows, access entry, covered entry. We had a kind of a discussion at the staff level that we really could build a roof dormer that covered your porch at a recess, and that could be point that out, is that you might look like one feature, but it could actually hit a number of. And the only consideration here is that you could require more than 4 of these requirements, but ultimately has to approve whatever pass. And what we put forward and propose, ask them. If we start getting too restrictive design review elements, require 20 different things, I can say, no, you can't do that, having the state code. So the way it's currently written is at least items would need to be present as part of the design review. And I also want to point out one of the key The design review only applies to additional units that are facing the street. So if you look at figure 7 here, that new, if the original yellow one would have to go through the designer. Figure 8, if the blue behind, it is not facing the street, it's not street facing, not actually have them go through this. Are new facing the street. Another example would be figure 11, if the one on the left was already existing, the design review standards would not. That is something that was made part of that legislation. So I want to pause here and see if there's any.
Conceivably, one of the interesting things that that Small Winds pointed out was that if the tiny home on wheels or the motorhome were behind, it can't be taller. But here it actually could be taller. You could see it despite the fact that there was a structure in front of it, and there's still nothing that we can do.
And this was the different types of different roofing requirements that we had. So besides the pitch, they also can include some of these. Can't be do is shed style roof or a flat style roof, or way the code's written is they would have to have one continuous, something where it looks like the sheds and round and smash them together. That also wouldn't be allowed.
Wouldn't want to see a skillion of those.
Just a remodel.
Just adding on to the house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of the codes that were impacted were covered and attached in Exhibit A in their staff report. It was 210, which is the light residential, 220, which is the multifamily, 50, which is parking, and 720, which is the accessory. I'm not going to walk through all of those changes. I'm just going to hit the highlights of what did change. Front setbacks had to change from. Our side setbacks were already in line with legislation required. Rear setbacks are changing. And we also had to increase the max site coverage. 7.5 or the LR12. Now, those are the minimums, and offer more than that, but all that would do would be heard back in some of the discussion was that ours up to the minimum. One thing I would point out is the townhomes, regardless of what setbacks and site coverages are, is that 100 square feet have a site coverage of at least 7. We also point out that the cottage housing that is included part of the ADU code has its own section, but it was ours closely mirrored that, so there's not any. I mentioned 350, which is parking. So anything under 4 units, you can only require 1 space per unit. We cannot require additional parking spaces. If there's tear it down, tear the whole thing down and rebuild it, then we would be able to require 1 unit per structure and add 3 separated quad duplex. We don't have the ability to requirements as part of the design. Finally, street parking is also now credit under the. Can require 1 unit space per unit, but if there's parking, they get credit for that as long as.
So they could build triplex on the lot and not even have a driveway to it.
Yeah,
Or even a walkway, as it would
That street parking within walking distance to the house?
No, it has to be,
I mean,
we're getting the C word. And
said that differently.
Contiguous?
contiguous
Okay,
to,
yeah.
thank you. So contiguous to the property. You can't count your neighbors,
Yeah.
the parking in front of your neighbors.
On
as-
Maple, if you're doing it on Ash.
I mean, dealing with curved roads will, but we did talk and did get, if part of the redevelopment is to take down a carport, garage, or parking, couldn't do that and then not add any additional parking. So they couldn't take away from the existing as part of the
So
redevelopment.
conceivably, you could leave the structure up, but if you tear down the garage,
If you tear down the garage and build your second unit, then you would have to provide some parking
right,
because
provide some parking.
you've actually removed parking that was already existing.
Related to that, Seth, I made a note here on that page when I was looking at that. Could you eliminate all your front yard to create parking?
You would have to meet the setbacks, so that dropped to 10 feet up front. Way to that,
Well, I mean,
you have to move your house.
Well, not necessarily.
Or
Not
some
that-
of your 70
Or you could-
Cadillac Broughams so that you don't have to
Deed in
park
the
with the
first 10
bumper
feet of
touching the
street.
house.
Well, if you had a big front yard, you wouldn't.
Yeah,
I mean, it just depends on, so the question is, could you eliminate the landscaping and create parking in front?
Good if you meet your minimum site coverage and setbacks.
Okay.
I'm trying to visualize what that would look like.
Oh,
Kind
you
of
got,
a
you
daisy
got,
chain of houses.
It's, did you say earlier that we can't set a maximum, or is there any drawback to setting a maximum lot coverage? Because the minimums seem too close together to even build.
I'm sorry, so the maximum site coverage is.
Oh,
is
I'm
now
sorry. Okay,
0.5.
all right, thank you.
There is
Oh,
no,
yeah.
there is no minimum.
Okay, but still, yeah, that's that might be sort of a drawback that the people that composed the House bill didn't think about. I mean, you're already at 40% site coverage. How do you build another home with only 5% more site coverage?
And that was part of the analysis. That's why they highlighted that in Riverwood. There's not, and they're already, those homes are on small lot, they're big homes on small lots. You're not really gonna be able to do larger lots. Expect to see some changes, but that would have to, again, part of that analysis, they didn't like, a lot of those lots were configured so that or that would make sense.
Like a lot of things this should have done on another meeting, but the reason that then the MIG, when they did the analysis of what could happen in Wood Village, that only some lots could have the triplex and only some lots could have the duplex, because unless they tore down the existing home, that's all they could squeeze in and stay under the maximum site coverage.
Yeah,
Okay.
to actually, for a lot of those lots to large enough that you could have to demolish the ones that we had, the ADUs that we have done, we've seen some of the lots that had it happen can accommodate one, they probably couldn't have accommodated up.
I do have a question.
Are additional utility service for each structure? Oh, sorry. I can find it out and get back for you. I think cost wise, if you go above 2 stories, then like one of the large multifamily, you have to could conceivably build 3 units stacked on top of each other. Conceivably, you could do whatever you want. It's just probably,
Our height restriction about,
Well, it's, yeah, it's in residential, right? Isn't it taller and or isn't it, is it shorter in residential and tall than it is in commercial?
I thought.
Is
it was
135 and
shorter.
145? Yeah, so residential's 35 and commercial. Which, you know, is essentially, you know, what House Bill 2001 is doing, you know, yeah.
Go up.
and
Go up totally.
everywhere except around Troutdale Airport where you.
Yeah, exactly. Got to keep it
135
below.
feet.
Well, and it's another, you know, thing to reconsider with our tiny home on. You know, that's sort of a place where we can control the character of the development that's likely. Whereas we can't.
So yes, each addition are putting in a detached or attached duplex. Separate utility service. Rather than in the case of tiny home or RV, allowing you to pull off of the existing. Building a separate structure, permanent structure that could have 3 or 4 people. Adding an RV or a tiny.
And our previous discussion, it actually is affordable, where one thing that House Bill 2001 didn't take in density doesn't necessarily.
oh, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
And in a lot of cases, getting higher density only makes sense where you can pencil, which means that it's not going to be affordable. So next step, so when one of the things I asked Greg when we were discussing this is all of this is prescriptive, then why are we going through the process? And so he let me know that the next steps are to do a public open house in April. Because that was one of the requirements for adopting the defaulting this, had to have some public out. We are planning to do that on April 7th. And this is there aren't a lot of we don't have a lot of options. We could in gathering feedback from other municipalities, staff, elected officials. A lot of people have opinions like to do or would like to. Unfortunately, kind of constrained, have a lot of options. So public outreach, it's going to be more have control over and have the.
well, and probably an episode where while intentionality is important, someplace where we don't have to be quite as intentional, you know, because some of the outreach is, you know, hey, you know, look over here, you have the potential to be the developer, and that's the positive part. But some of the outreach is just, don't look over here because you have the potential to be outraged. Home rule has been, so probably one night. But we could get more intentional around, you know, sending that MIG, you know, colored block report, you know, these lots could have yellow, these lots could have red, blue, actually sending it out to those lots, you know, and telling them that they do potentially have this sort of development ability. Sort of like giving people first dibs.
Yeah, and I think that we could probably take a look at have those links and are interested in,
Yeah,
they could do.
there's a, let's see, what is this, March? There's like one newsletter.
Yeah, it comes out, I think, the second week of May.
Well, you gotta get some information, however we can do it.
And again, this one, unlike the RV tiny home code, this does have a hard deadline of June 30th. Not by then
Well,
And I think it's, yeah, important to hit that timeline on this because it is statutory. we're taking options where we can, but
And reading through the changes, you know, it appears as though, you know, staff and MIG have done a wonderful job of, you know, finding sort of the widest margin that we can nibble on. So,
Past the DLCD.
well, I mean, there were at least three important elements where you talked about that we were already similar. Maybe they didn't need House Bill 2001. And Wood Village is the model code and everybody has to adopt it.
My suggestion to Greg when we were, why don't you have DLCD run the public?
That's right. Let them handle the outreach. Well, we've done that with the county before and they've cried like babies and complained to us.
Yeah, I think they wrote the legislation deliberately. Public outreach if they wanted to. We will be carrying the torch for public engagement and public outreach on this one.
So any other questions or comments for Seth? Yeah,
that's.
hey, don't leave so soon. Oh, no, you're right. You're right. We do have
No,
John.
He gets a small break.
Yeah, you get a small one. Next, we have the. John. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if, you know, it's been a while since you've seen one of John's public works reports.
Hey, I do watch the television.
That's true. Yeah, you
Okay.
do. Yeah.
I'm the only one in the city, but I do.
Charlotte does occasionally when she's not already tired of me and needs a break.
To see what I'm.
And there is a rerun on tonight of the January.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
Lord knows I don't remember what happened. Slept since then. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you
Appreciate it.
guys.
Good to see you.
Get your thoughts.
Have a nice evening, Mr. Mott. Good evening, Mayor,
Once the
city
planning
councilors.
commission leaves the room, I'll also.
All right, so here I'll start off with the March 22 Public Works Director's Report. As you saw around the city, the banners were straightened up a little bit. We took the seasonal banners down, put the city banners up. There were some additional banners that had to be ordered for Wood Village Boulevard. So I know Counselor Minor, during your walks, I'm sure you noticed there's three banners missing. We got them on order. We'll get them up.
John, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't notice that, but I'm gonna start counting.
So in the director's report, you did receive agendas for Mucktuck and the Levy Ready, the urban
Urban
Flood
renewal. flood
safety district. I've been providing you, agendas with the Levy Ready Urban Flood District. We're going to be getting into rate analysis and studies, which I know that's what you're really want to hone in on. I'll have more information on that as we dive into that. When I do receive that, we'll spend more time.
John, would you, the mayor asked about the fatalities report, and we didn't have one last month from Mucktuck. So, and you might remember I asked when we have another one, can you print that, please?
I will.
You got to go to the website now,
Okay.
because she doesn't, we don't get any paper.
Okay.
And I think that's in conversation, because when I saw it, it was, it really opened my eyes a little bit of how many fatalities, how many people are being killed once in Multnomah County.
I will print that and
Yeah,
include that.
yeah, and we just bring that with us each meeting.
Okay, I will do that.
Yeah.
And just a list of, projects that the utility staff completed through the month. Solar benches, if you've seen them out there, they're lit up. We actually have posters in there now. So,
They're cool. People are using them.
people are using
There
them
you
all day.
Community events is the poster in there. It's now, they look really good.
And development's continuing. You have Jersey Mike's in the Joint Town Center. They're, plugging along. There was some confusion on the Sire's contractor and Jersey Mike's and the joint so tenant improvements and actual Sire improvements. We're working with our building official on that, we're getting them squared away.
And they are right up next to the juice.
Yes, they
Yeah,
are. Jersey
yeah.
Mike's.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And we just received design review for Burger King, converting that into a Starbucks. 40 to 45.
That'll be an
For design
enhancement
review.
down there.
Ownership hadn't told the Burger King employees yet.
Yeah.
Do we have a timeline for the Jersey Mike's or
And not at this point.
at that point?
Actually put a stop work on there and our building official did.
Too bad for the joint because, while Jersey Mike's has, sort of remained anonymous, Joint's been doing social media outreach, telling people that they're coming to Wood Village and had videos on Facebook.
It's just been just issue after issue. And our building official is trying to work with.
Yeah.
And any word on the byway and any tenants in there?
No, have not received. I know development by the forward, but as far as tenants, we have not.
And up on the Lowe's pad there, the
Chick-fil-A?
Chick-fil-A, yeah,
They're still moving along,
They're moving
I
along.
mean, there's in the town center plan, there's certain conditions they have to abide by and to get that configuration just right. They're working on it.
okay.
Building angle's been an issue. Instead of the front of the building and the sign facing Wood Village Boulevard, it'd be the dumpsters and the utility.
Earlier this week, we did receive. We're getting closer,
Okay,
so.
thanks.
Water production over 13 million gallons, water loss still around that. Just over 12 million.
So are we still in the winter doldrums or do we have a way to point to why we're now seemingly 4 months in a row at double digit loss?
We do, and we're may need to calibrate some of our meters. But we're working with our data specialist now to confirm flow rates and calibrate meters.
Because it does seem like it's mechanics. I mean, a swimming pool hasn't popped up somewhere in the
Yeah,
city.
no,
So,
not
yeah, yeah.
that we've.
Backyard.
And they are working, the staff is working, vigilantly with citizens and residents that might have water loss in their residential system. They notify you.
Questions for public?
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
We've kind of forgotten poor Council President Nissen out there on the call. Council President, please chime in if you have. We have our Finance Director's report with Seth.
Mr. Mayor, Council. No presentation, PowerPoint tonight. Put in your packet is all of your standard capital. At the Budget Committee meeting on the 9th. Things have some additional CC. Patberg, they got stuck behind one of our. The other thing I wanted to mention as part of the report is we cutoffs for the first time in 2 years. had utility staff, office staff to tag all of the businesses, 5-day door hangers. That was happen. Had automated calls go out on Thursday. Cutoffs, and we also resent them again on Monday. Called the started out, I think, Monday morning. 33 people on the shut off list. Stepped up really well. Becky, Elena, all shut-offs on Tuesday. Off once a home that is being flipped by Zillow, and arrangement with a tenant that I think, which is why they have two accounts. So one to run the water to their business and the other to run the water to the privy that they're employed.
So the 8 that are no longer shut off, how many of them paid? Applied for utility of the from 33 down?
I'll go ahead and get you those stats. I can tell you, having off the top of my head, about 2/3 of the people on the shut off list did end up applying.
Did you say did?
Did.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
We had about maybe five but paid.
Yeah.
And we are currently, as of today's check run, spent $82,000. Part of the budget adjustment that's coming on the 19th is where we're going to project what that will cost to run through 30th per council direction.
Direction, sure, yeah. So right now, technically, $1,000 over the.
Well, since John hasn't spent all the rest of the money, we still have.
There's still some rescue act funds left, yeah. All right.
Hey,
Okay.
Seth, in
It's the
this,
non-technical expert.
Yep.
as you kind of analyze this and begin thinking about how much we might have to add in the supplemental budget to get us through the year. One of the things, and I'm not sure how we made the contacts, I may be calling, I'm sure. But once the contact was made and once the water was shut off and once the contact was made, then the large percentage of those people utilize the support, correct? It'd be interesting to watch then and see if some stepped up and paid.
And I'll get you those statistics.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing we found out is we're trying to, because a lot of the people apply, we're trying to, and in the habit of falling behind on their bills. It's always been a struggle to make that contact. So nice things about doing the application. Honestly, some of the accounts, we just have a contact number.
Yeah.
Person, if, owner moved or changed number, constant contact with them.
And a good opportunity to let them know too, this money is running out.
Yes.
We can help you this month, but you really got to kind of figure out.
Water and sewer is not the only thing that
Oh, they got a lot.
continues, to come through on applications. For instance, here's one.
Yeah.
And we did get a number of the people who applied for the city funds also. Their private utilities, PG.
And not, I don't think, this is just a question of myself. It's like, how many of these folks that were on the shut off list that you guys had to do the initial or the extra outreach, were some of those the same folks that you had to do the initial outreach when the funds were available last year? Were they a lot of the similar people?
We had at least 3 or 4 account of those 30 accounts that hadn't made a payment since.
Yeah.
Payment that we did when we wound that program down. But I'd say probably at least half of the folks were only a month or two. We did have some people who have had been either applying as part of the CARES program and then just hadn't done it since then. Were on the shut off list from times before COVID. Had a lot of notes on their account just in trying to do with them.
But well, I'm glad they're getting information as well as when money we have left, they're getting their water paid for too.
Yeah.
And
Well, we're getting finally some concessions on the other side, PG. In our original CARES Act funding, we paid $90,000 worth of bills and every bill on an individual check. And they've finally gotten around to allowing us.
Made Becky
Very nice.
happy.
Next time you see one of them. Yeah.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. So next up is the city manager report. Emery, you going to make the city manager report or John? No city manager report.
There is no report.
That's the report. There's no report.
City attorney's report. Jeff, do you have a city attorney report?
I do not, Mr. Mayor. Oh,
Okay,
excuse me.
crazy kids on the council have anything to report?
Right.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I wasn't catching the crazy kid thing, so I better pay attention here. Just 2 things, and we talked a little bit about Ukraine support. I have we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but in our next newsletter, I would like to see us put an announcement on there where Wood Village residents can make contributions. And it's at the Ukraine Bible Church. And I have that contact information. And if we could do, a flag and just say, Wood Village supports, however you want to word it. But I would certainly think that's an outreach to our Ukrainian population and some Russian populations too. So
Absolutely.
if that can fit into the next newsletter.
Very much a going concern. I think that I heard that Gresham Ford and some other businesses were working with the church and they had already put together 58 pallets worth of supplies. Just like we, gave the $3,000 Hammer Jets church to do oxygen tanks for India. We might want to consider, 500 or 1,000 out of council discretionary funds to go to it as well. So
Yeah.
it's probably a reasonable agenda item actually to add to next
I
time.
believe in council discretionary this year, there's still $3,100 left in
$3,100,
discretionary.
yeah.
Well, we can maybe talk about that the next time, but if we can get that on that newsletter, so we are at least demonstrating symbolically and maybe materially wise, we support our residents here.
So in addition to the newsletter, did you want to add that on social media as well?
Well, social media, and I guess, the website
website.
temporarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there maybe a particular message that you feel like you want to come from you?
Well, we did, we didn't do a proclamation as I remember, but we did write a letter that we adopted after the January 6th insurrection.
I would,
So we could certainly.
I would
do
support the
something like
mayor
that.
if he wants to pin a
Sure.
letter that would fit in that newsletter or on social media.
I think that would be a nice touch. So yeah, so I could put that.
I would
together.
just suggest if you have a contact to the church, Mayor, I believe you attended a meeting they had there, is maybe reach out to them and have them help craft some
Yep,
language
some
in
language,
there
yep.
to be more meaningful and intentional there. So that would be great.
And I had one more thing. if we can, and I say this in all honesty, if we can, if we're thinking about doing a litter pickup, that I've been kind of, keep banging around on that thing, that dead horse until you guys tell me this, they ain't gonna happen, but, a litter pickup here this year. By the time of our, Wood Village Night Out, if we're able to do that, I will, hold a little booth there and
Actually,
put on a vest, my Wood Village vest, and I will be signing up volunteers.
love it
All right.
because this was actually brought up at the West Columbia Gorge Rotary Club, and they're
Yeah.
actually on board with adding our location as one of the cleanups annually.
Well, if we could coordinate that with whoever we can get and our citizens, then, maybe we'll have a party.
That will be
Yeah, do we have
Bill.
another newsletter? Do we have another newsletter before cleanup day? I mean, maybe we could encourage that too. Take a trip around your,
The cleanup day is scheduled for Saturday, May 14th.
So it would go out right the week
Right,
before.
encourage people to, put a bag together on their street or in their neighborhood and throw it in their truck and bring it to cleanup day.
So that one is community cleanup day, but if we're just talking about litter pickup, that is kind of in the works and discussion with the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And so that was part of that discussion of having Wood Village as one of the locations.
Yeah.
But we haven't set a date yet.
I just noticed that Solve, did another great pickup down along the Willamette River. It's just, it gets done if we can do it. Help, I believe. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you very much.
Yep,
Councilman, both,
absolutely.
Wonderful suggestions. Council President Nissen and Jeff, thank you for joining us tonight via the phones, and we will go ahead and adjourn.
Good night, everyone.
Hey.
No,
Thanks, Counselor.
Yeah, we had very robust discussions and
hey, Bruce,